that's going to bring us on to blue. So first card for blue, we're going back to the commons, back to 1 mana. Cogwork Wrestler, single blue mana for a 1/2 flash artifact creature. When it ETBs, target creature an opponent controls gets -2, -0 until end of turn.
Yes, we've seen Deceive the Messenger in Lord of the Rings be great, and we've seen, was it Brine Barrow Intruder in Kaldheim be not so great?
Yeah.
And I think that if this thing were not an artifact, I would not be that excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my gut is that the effect is not as appealing. There's not as many X1s. Like, there's not a ton of 2/1s, 3/1s in the file. Not that many 1/1s. A lot of them that are there have flying or some other form of evasion. So you're not going to be eating a lot of stuff often. But the fact that it's an artifact is big, I think, and that's going to make it playable in a lot of decks.
Yeah, there was also Zendikar Rising, which is a format I know you weren't quite around for. You weren't back in the game just yet, but there was a 1 mana, I think it was 1 mana 1/1 that had this ability and milled 2 and was also a rogue. So it's like it had some other synergy things, but it reminds me of this because it's just like you said. It's like, well, it wouldn't be quite good enough, I think, if it didn't have those little, that a little bit of a thing to push it over the edge. But being an artifact does, I think, push it over the edge to being a playable card. Still not like, you're not going to want to load up on these things, but I think you're going to be pretty happy playing the first copy in most blue decks. It's like
you want to give it like C? Yeah, I was going to say C.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, next we have Erazka Puzzle Door, blue for an artifact, and you can pay 1, tap, and sack it to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand and the other in your graveyard.
Yeah, I like this card. I think this card's pretty good. So it's sort of sleight of handy. Obviously, it's an additional mana, but that's in installments. It's a artifact that you can play early if your hand is pretty loaded with the things that care about, tapping artifacts or any of the other things that care about artifacts. Obviously, going to mention triggers your descent. It's not like kind of like the last card. It's not a card you're like, oh man, I just want all of these, but it's a fun glue card.
What were you planning on giving it? Because I have a feeling we're going to have a difference of opinion on this card.
Okay. So you're. It sounds like you're lower on it. I was gonna give it just like I would give Sleight of Hand a C-. I was gonna give this a C- too.
Oh, okay. I am with you on C-.
Nice. Okay. It sounds like I was doing the thing that you were doing for the other cards. Like kind of tempering expectations. I've seen people be lower on this than I am. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. The fact that you have to, like, it's not an ETB is big because you are going to want to sacrifice this at the first possible opportunity.
Right, to get your card
back. Right, like, first time you have an open mana, you're going to sacrifice this. So you can't, like, keep tapping it for stuff. You can't, like, do other stuff, shenanigans with it. But triggering Descent, getting another card in your graveyard, giving you some selection, instant speed activation, it's certainly playable.
Yep. All right, cool. So we're both on the, I'm on the high C-, you're on the lower C-. I like it. Next up, we got Relic's Roar. This is one I wonder if this is going to trigger some conversation. Single blue mana for an instant. Until end of turn, target artifact or creature becomes a dinosaur artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/3 in addition to its other types. So.
Yeah, so it doesn't draw a card like we've seen on some of the effects, but it costs 1 mana. 1 single mana. And I find this card really interesting.
Yeah. So give me your use cases for this, because I think it's kind of non-obvious.
So I think you basically never want to target like one of your creatures unless it's like a last resort.
Yeah.
You want to be targeting an artifact in play, right? So there's so many like trinkety artifacts, and so the threat of it, like leaving up 1 blue is not that hard to do. And there's this package of Cogwork Wrestler, which is the 1/2 we saw with Flash that gives -2, -0. This card, and there's going to be a 2 mana bounce spell that if you bounce a tap creature, you get a map coming up soon. And they're all commons, right?
Yep.
And between the 3 of those existing all at common, pretty much whatever sized creature your opponent attacks in with, they're going to have a bad time.
Right.
Like if they attack with like a 6/6, you can just bounce it, make a map, and that's like a huge tempo swing, right? If they attack with like a 2/2, this can, eat their card. If they attack with a 4/4, this can trade with their card. They attack with a 1/1, the Cogwork eats their card. But also, you can combine this with Cogwork to just like out of nowhere have a flash blocker, give something -2, -0, and eat like a 4/4 or something, right? So I really think that if you're going to be doing a bunch of trinkety things and drawing cards and setting up your craft, you're going to need to worry about falling too far behind on tempo.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically just like 1 mana, catch up on tempo. Your board is now clear. I can continue to do my fiddly thing.
Yes, you basically, like, you said it better than I could, I think, and that's exactly where I'm thinking about it too. It's a defensive card. You're not cards like this have been classically aggressive cards. You attack, you're like, all right, I guess I block. You cast your Majestic Metamorphosis or Suit Up, and you really get them. Like you said, I do not think you want to be targeting creatures with this very often, but just look at the cards. You know, the puzzle door we just looked at. You can wake that up, and heck, if it goes wrong, you can sacrifice the door, right? If they have a removal slow combat trick, it doesn't matter that much. And so this is a card that I think is it's going to be tricky to figure out for a lot of people when they should be playing it. I think it's going to read like an aggressive card, so people are going to play it in the wrong spots. Like, I guess the way to put this is I think this card will not be performing very well in 17 lands in the early days. And then once you start by top players later, maybe it'll get a little bit better. What do you want to give it? Because it's such a odd card to grade.
I wrote down C, which is kind of the grade. Like in a artifact control shell, I think I want exactly 1 copy of this type of thing.
Right. Yeah. And I think a really good way to illustrate how the power of this card is, you mentioned this, but you said it's a way to like kind of take back the tempo or kind of alleviate some pressure from the opponent. You all know that feeling, right? You're playing a controlling deck. Your opponent has a good start, 1 into 2 into 3, and you're like, if I just had like 1 card, like even just a bounce spell to catch me up here, I actually would be in a pretty good spot. And this is what that does for a single mana. So yeah, I'll join you, and this is gonna be one that I'm very interested to see where it lands. And there's that bounce spell, Brackish Blunder, 1 and a blue for an instant. Return target creature to its owner's hand. If it was tapped, you make a map token.
Yeah, so this one's a lot more just like generically good.
Yeah, this is just a fine card. Like, you're just happy. This is bounce a creature, draw a card, or half a card, you know, whatever you want to say. Sometimes you draw a card off of it. It is better if you're defensive, of course, but you can use it on attacks if you want it. Yeah, I like C+ for Brackish Blunder.
C+. Yep.
Great, nice.
Totally with you there.
All right, what do we have next?
Next, we have Inverted Iceberg. 1 and a blue for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, mill a card, then draw a card. And you can craft with an artifact for 4 blue to turn it into a 6/6 Iceberg Titan. And when it attacks, you may tap or untap target artifact or creature.
Right. Yeah, this is one I really had to think about what the rest of the colors and the rest of blue, what it was doing to really evaluate. And I still don't think I love it. What do you think?
I do love it.
Oh, okay. I'm excited to hear. Yeah, let's hear it.
I think this card is great.
Okay.
Like, so it's basically 1 and a blue. Like, it's 1 and a blue, draw 2 cards. Is it not? Like, it's not just and it gives you an artifact lying around. We've talked about having artifacts to be able to animate into 4/3s or being able to, you know, sacrifice the stuff or whatever. There's even like a blue uncommon animate thing that we're going to see shortly. And so milling a card is going to be certainly relevant text. It might even mill the artifact that you need to be able to craft later. And then it basically, draws you a random card and a 6/6 with huge upside. Like this 6/6, it either has vigilance or it makes blockers a nightmare. Like this is, when I picture you set up with blue-white and then late game, you want to craft something to win the game. Like, this is exactly what I'm picturing.
Yeah, just like a big 6/6 is going to be fine enough when you've got enough removal and stuff. Okay, I feel like I'm definitely higher on it than I was 50 seconds ago or whatever. I think I was going to say, I think I'm still a little bit lower on it than you are, but I don't know the grade. This might be talking it up. But what are you going to grade it?
I've written down my grade.
Okay.
I'll hear what you say, and then we'll do a comparison.
I think it's going to... I would land this at a C. But
okay, I've given it a hot take B-.
Oh, so. I love it. No, I honestly, like, the more Mark hot takes we can get, the better it is. I love that. All right, yeah, we'll see. I'm excited to seeing another one. I'm like earmarking for. Let's see how it plays out. All right, next up we've got Oaken Siren, 1 and a blue for a 1/2 flying vigilance. It's a pirate. It taps to add blue, but you can only spend the mana on artifact spells or activating abilities of artifacts.
Yeah, this is another great example of like what I want to be doing. Like I want to be drafting blue-white control in this format, basically.
Yeah.
And this is so good for that deck. Like
Yeah.
vigilance, flying means it just pecks in. Being able to like post combat add mana, being able to like being a card you mill that's an artifact creature, so you can craft it as an artifact or as a creature. It's even a pirate, which has some potential synergies too. You can put the counters on the from the blue
From
red land
Storm.
restorm onto
Yeah.
this thing. Like it's very gluey. I like this card quite a bit.
Yeah. Me too. I agree with that. Also, I just wanted to say, just this is they're the last card where we kind of had a big difference of opinion. There's some people who are more on your side, more on my side. I think no matter where you are, you shouldn't dismiss either opinion, right? Because if two people are saying a different thing, like that should just be pause for. If you think one of them is a wild, like there's no way it's this, like you probably haven't thought about it enough, to be honest. Like you haven't put in the thought of that, like kind of playing both sides of like what this does for in a deck it's great in, or maybe you're misevaluating it just on power in general. So no, this is kind of like not to make this review any longer, but just note, like you're the first reaction if you're like, wow, that's crazy. Look to yourself first. Look if you're undervaluing something rather than, oh, that person must be wrong. And I'm not just saying that to save face here, of course. I'm just saying this is just like for your own growth as a player. Anyways, back to Oaken Siren. What do you like?
Token Siren, I just wrote down C+ for this. I
Yeah.
think it's good.
Yeah, I'll go with that too. They've been hitting on this kind of card in the past little while, where with the Pelgrim Survivor, they also hit on just like this card actually being good. And of course, this is a little bit different, but I like C+. Pirate Hat. Who doesn't love a good Pirate Hat? 1 and a blue for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever this creature attacks, you loot, draw a card, discard a card. Equip Pirate for 1, but equip anything else for 2.
Yeah, this is kind of weird. It's like this is one of those gluey cards where I feel like they tried to make it do too many things,
Yeah,
but
totally.
it's worse than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, wow, that's such great. I had that exact feeling, but wasn't putting it into those words. But that's exactly right. You're like, okay, like descends, and it's got pirate stuff, and it's an artifact, but like it doesn't. It's a jack of all trades, and like, yeah. I don't think this one is great. And maybe there's like some weird pirate aggro deck that like red blue kind of snipes weird cards that the other blue decks don't want. But I will start low on Pirate Hat. I'm gonna give it a D.
Yeah, I was gonna give it like a D+.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay.
Next up, we've got River Herald Scout. This is 1 and a blue for a 1/2. It's a merfolk. When it enters the battlefield, it explores. Ooh.
Yeah, in most sets, I think this would be blue's best common. The fact that it's not an artifact, like, does... I'm still going to play it in the artifacts deck, but it does put it down a tiny bit of a peg, I guess.
Yeah.
But being able to explore on a 1/2 body as a 2-drop, this is a great 2-drop,
Yes.
and people are going to be playing this frequently.
Yeah, it's a premium too. I would just give it a B, honestly.
Yeah, I was going to go B-.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, very good card. What do we have next?
Next, we have Shipwreck Sentry. 1 and a blue for a 3/3 human pirate. It has Defender, but as long as an artifact enters the battlefield under your control this turn, it can attack as though it didn't have Defender.
Yeah, these cards aren't generally very good. Like, the idea is like, okay, I'm a defensive speed creature early, and then like, oh, later, I attack as a 3/3. Who cares? Like, you're controlling decks that, if your deck is so controlling, you're willing to put a Defender in it, you don't care about the output of I can attack later in the game. So yeah, this is just a D-. Like you can play it in your controlling deck if you like didn't pick up enough 2-drops or something.
Are you gonna give it? I don't think it's that bad. I was gonna give it a D+. Like it's
sure, yeah,
it's
yeah. I was gonna give
a lot
it.
of artifacts.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Are you gonna give it a D or a D-?
I was gonna. Yeah, let's go D. I'm still, even with the fact that it will trigger enough. I don't think I love it. Song of Stupefaction. Great name. 1 and a blue for an aura. Enchant creature or vehicle. When Song of Stupefaction enters the battlefield, you can mill 2 cards. And it has Fathomless Descent. So this is our first instance of this. Yeah, ooh, Fathomless Descent. So it's like an italic keyword where it doesn't actually mean anything, but it just means, oh, look, stuff in the graveyard. Enchanted permanent gets -X, -O, where X is the number of permanents in your graveyard.
So this is only really for one deck. Like milling 2, you're just if you're playing blue-black where you need to hit that 8 number, this is both a permanent and a mill spell and a kind of removal spell. But like if you're not in specifically like blue-black, I think no deck wants this.
Right, exactly. Like I read this card, like, this was in Crimson Vow, not very good. Actually, it was a little bit better. There's a little bit of line of text that made it a little bit better in Crimson Vow, but this is still not a good removal spell, especially in those controlling decks that are going to go a little bit longer. You have to care about the mill. So in a deck that cares about the mill, like a D plus, I don't know. What do you like?
We'll give it a D plus.
Yeah,
but with the caveat that, again, most decks, I've kind of been grading as if, like, best case scenario type of things.
Yeah, that's fair. What's next?
Next we have, I just jumped ahead as well. Sage of Days, 2 and a blue for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards back on top and put the rest in your graveyard.
So, like, pretty often you're just going to mill 2, put 1 on top, I would imagine. Maybe even mill 3. It's okay. I think it's fine.
What do you want to give it? Like another one where I want to gauge you before I say anything.
Yeah. I feel like Mark's like, I really like this one. I was just gonna give it. Okay, let me think about this for a second. I was gonna give it a C, but
okay.
What do you want to give it?
No, see. I thought you were gonna give it somewhere in the D range.
Okay, yeah. No, I
was gonna hit you with the C out of nowhere and blindside you.
But
yeah. I agree with you.
Like, it's in a set that you care about the graveyard, just milling 3 is a good thing on your 3-drop. Like, if you see 3 cards you don't like and putting them in the graveyard is something you choose to do, that will benefit you, even if you don't keep something on top. So, yeah, that's what makes it the C. That's funny.
Someone who's played as many Chrome Cats as you have, or whatever, the whatever the 3/2s that try for 3 mana.
Yeah.
Like, this is better than those in most cases.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, C for Sage of Days.
Sure.
Next up, Water Wind Scout, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer. It's a merfolk. When it enters the battlefield, you make a map token. Yeah.
Hot damn. Yeah, this is it's an artifact, makes an artifact, it's a flyer, it's 2 permanents, it's just everything you want to do.
Yeah, just fantastic. Yeah. B plus?
B plus? Ooh, I don't. I'll just go B.
Okay, yeah. I think it's got all those things you said, but also just like a great rate. I mean, Windrake is not a great rate, but map token plus Windrake is a great rate. So I will leave my B plus alone. What do you have next?
Next is Ancestral Reminiscence, 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Draw 3 cards, then discard a card. So a renamed Sift.
Yeah, it's just if you cover the like the right side of this card, it kind of just looks like Ancestral Recall, because it's like Ancestral draw 3 cards. it's that pesky right side of the card that's messing it up. What do we think about Sift in 2023, but also in a graveyard centric set?
Like, no board impact. It's not a permanent. So, like, if you're playing this because you want to get cards in the graveyard, well, you don't want this in your graveyard, and you don't want one of the cards that you mill from one of your other cards to be this.
Right.
So it takes like a knock, and then not being an instant, like, you can't hold it up with the counters. I think instead of drawing cards this way, you want to be drawing cards with Explore, with Craft, with whatever other nonsense you got going on. So I'm pretty down on this.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, while draw 3, discard a card is definitely better than draw 2, you're still only going up 2 cards. It's not like an Into the Fate Court style of card where you're like, oh, I'm just like way ahead because I'm up 3 cards on you. You're only up 2. And that means that it's a little more of a smooth out my draw kind of card than I cast early removal spells and gas back up with this thing. So yeah, I'm going to go pretty low on it. D minus, maybe? Yeah. I just don't think you're going to play this card very often.
Yeah, I'm with you on a D. Great.
Next up, we got Frilled Cave Worm. This is a 4 mana, 3 and a blue, 2/5. Got Descend 4, sorry. It gets +2/+0 as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. So turns into a 4 mana, 4/5.
Yeah, I kind of like cards like this in the card file, where it's like, most decks aren't going to want it, but the one deck that does, it's like pretty decent. Because I think if you're in blue-black, like, you'll play a bunch of these.
Yeah, I could see that.
But if you're not in blue-black, it's pretty bad, would be my guess.
Yeah, so we again, grading it as if it goes in the deck that we think it should go in. You want to give it like a C minus?
Yeah, okay. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, C minus for the Cave Worm in a controlling deck. Next up, this one's interesting. Out of Air, 2 blue for an instant. It costs 2 less to cast if it targets a creature spell, and it counters target spell. So you've got blue, kind of a Essence Scatter, and 4 mana cancel. Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that they made it so that it's harder to cascade into the counterspell, right? Which is like kind of a feel bad
That's
moment.
cute,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I think that's intentional.
Right.
But the fact that there's not like if the sift was an instant,
Yeah.
I would be a lot higher on this. Because then
Yeah.
leaving 4 mana up isn't just like that. Oh well, my opponent didn't. Because it's going to be pretty easy to sniff out the counterspells in this set.
You think so?
Like if your opponent leaves up mana,
Oh,
I
I see what
think
you're
almost
saying.
for sure they have
Right.
like they're
There's just
only leaving up mana for a couple cards. It's going to be really easy for like if you're a strong player, you should take the time if your opponent ever passes with mana in this set to be like, what do they have? Because there's only 35, I think, instants in the entire set, whereas there was like 66 in the previous set. So it's just over half. It should be a lot easier to figure out what your opponent has. And in blue, if they're passing with a bunch of mana open, it's always going to be a counterspell.
Yeah, and there are quite a few counter spells in blue in this set. And the other thing too that is probably obvious to some people, but I do think I should shout out is that blue on turn 2 is definitely not trivial. If your deck isn't mostly blue, like it can't be a split down the middle deck because you're just not going to have that on turn 2 enough of the time. It's just not a good enough card. So you have to be both like heavy blue, have some instants, and also probably like not have the better counter spells. So I kind of like the idea of the card, but I think in practice it's just not going to be that great. So I'd give
It
it like,
also doesn't counter craft. So if you like
yeah,
leave mana up and your opponent can craft, like it's a nightmare.
right, yeah, exactly. It's like if a good opponent can punish you for any card, that gives you a knock on it. So I'd give it like a D.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think I'm with you there.
Next up, we've got Unlucky Drop, 3 and a blue for an instant. A card we've seen quite a bit with many different names. Target artifact or creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library.
Yeah, so this is a way like we just talked about how there's not that much to do for 4 mana. There's not that much to do to leave your mana up, and immediately we do see at least one other way to like I can leave up my counterspell or I can leave up my unlucky drop. But this card with so many ETBs in the set, I'm not optimistic about it.
Yeah, I think so. We saw misleading moats in the last set, and that was quite bad in Wild's Drain because the cheap creatures, well, you traded down on mana, and the expensive creatures had good enter the battlefield effects or adventures, and a lot of that same stuff's going on here. So usually I'm pretty high on these cards, or high-ish relative to most people, but I'm gonna start low too. I'm gonna give it a D plus.
I was going to give it a D.
Okay.
Okay.
What's up next?
Next is Waylaying Pirates. 3 and a blue for a 3/3 human pirate. When it enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it.
Okay, like it's fine. It's not 4 mana 3/3 is not great. You're not always gonna have the stun counter. Although if you're putting it in your deck, you should almost always get the stun counter. Like that's probably a good way to look at it. Like if you're at all going to be at risk of it's just a 4 mana 3/3, you should probably just consider not drafting it, not playing it if you can help it. Even in like
isn't this just Bergstrider?
interesting comparison. Yeah, this is true.
Like it should be active roughly the same amount of time as Bergstrider was when you were playing like, the snow deck in Kaldheim.
Right. Okay, that does give me a little bit of a pause on my initial read.
Like you need to be playing lots of artifacts, but I'm expecting that's what I'm going to be doing.
If you're playing, yeah, I guess it makes sense. I was gonna say if you're playing a lot of artifacts, that kind of makes me think a little more controlling, but maybe that's not just the case inherently. All right, I'm willing to come up on it a little bit. Like I was gonna give it quite a low grade, but in a deck with artifacts, and you do want to be leaning leaning aggressive, I think it's probably like a C there. But are you leaning a little bit higher than that?
I wrote down C.
Okay, so yeah, come to the same conclusion. Yeah, the Verge Shredder. You're good.
I think it's going to be at its best in blue-red, but I'll still be happy to play it in blue-white, I think.
Sure. Yeah. That's fair enough. Okay. Yeah. I'm on board. Let's just give it that straight C.
Okay.
Didact Echo. It says 5 mana, 4 and a blue for a 3/2. When ETBs, draw a card, and descend 4. It has flying.
Yeah. So I think I've snapped out of. I've been not a boomer long enough that I'm not that excited about this,
Yeah.
whereas I might have been 10 years ago.
Make this 4 mana we're talking. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah, it'd be great at 4 mana.
yeah. Yeah, I think this is also a card I'm just not that into. Gonna start at like a D minus. I don't know if it's like, I hope not to play at level, but I do not think it's a card you're looking for. Basically ever.
I'll give it a D. I don't think I'm gonna go D
All
minus.
right.
Like if the set's low, this is still a 2 for 1.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right.
Like I think this is. Do you think this is better or worse than the Sift?
Hmm. I was going to say better. Yeah, I think better. I just think better.
Yeah. Okay. And you gave the Sift
A D.
D. So you
Right.
can't give this a D
That's
minus.
fair. All right, all right.
That's
Keep
not
me
how it
honest.
works.
Keep me this. This is why we have Mark on, because I'm loosey goosey with the grades. All right. Yeah. I'll join you at D plus there.
Okay.
Last blue common is the blue land cycler, Marauding Brine Fang, 5 blue blue, for a 6/7 ward 3 with island cycling for 2.
Yeah. So out of all the land cyclers, like blue and black wanting descend the most,
Mhm.
this is going to be the most relevant. Unfortunately, the body on this is like 7 mana is a lot. Like I'd rather have a 6 mana 5/6 or whatever.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not thrilled about this.
Yeah, it's ward on a 7 drop, like ward 3. I mean, it's going to come up sometime, it's going to be relevant, but like it's not like, oh man, I need to remove that thing or I just lose. You could just chump
Yeah.
it. Right? It's like not that big of a
Yeah.
deal. I think this is probably the worst of the bunch. But it's still
Yeah, the
fine.
nice one about the Merchant of the Sheen one was that it was unblockable, so you could
Yeah,
just
that
like
was
kill
big.
someone with it. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. You want to give this a D plus then? C
D
minus?
plus? Yeah, I think D plus.
Okay, cool. It's gonna bring us to the uncommons in blue. Spyglass Siren is the first one here. 1 mana for a 1/1 flyer. It's a pirate, and it makes a map token. So kind of just a smaller version of the one we saw a few minutes ago.
Pirate who knows where they buried their treasure.
Yeah, this is great. Great
Oh,
card.
so good.
Yeah, just
Like
one.
this is even a great 2-drop.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, right? You just go play it, explore on turn 2. Yeah. Um, man, how high can we go in this? I was higher on the other one than you were. I think I'm still gonna be pretty high on this one. Kind
I
of
was
want to
gonna
give
give this.
B plus.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
wrote down.
yeah. I was gonna say
It's
because
that
I
great.
don't think I can give this a lower grade than the other one. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm on board. B plus for Spyglass Siren. What's up next?
Next is Waterlogged Hulk. Blue for an artifact. You can tap it to mill a card, and you can craft with an island for 3 and a blue, and it becomes a 4/4 vigilance vehicle with crew 1. And if you have descend 8, which means 8 permanents in your graveyard, then it can't be blocked.
Yeah, I think this card is pretty good. I think the fact that you have a person, yeah, Mark's like, maybe kind of like, yeah, head tilting. I'm not sure. I think that the let me retract my statement or amend it. I think that in a deck that is descending actively, you're going to be happy with Ghoul Color Spell for those who have played Innistrad. For the context, Ghoul Color Spell was just this card, but an artifact didn't have the backside, and you could target your opponent for what it's worth. But there was a lot of flashback in that set, a lot of things just like in this set cares about the graveyard, and in the most heavy of heavy cards cares about the graveyard decks, you would play that card pretty happily just to fill the grave. This one has, of course, the backside, which is a nice little backside. It's not like a busted vehicle, but it's a solid one. So I guess the question for me is how deep into it do you have to be to play this card? And I think you probably have to be a deck that wants to descend 8, not descend 4.
Yeah, and it is nice that crafting does exile the card and return it, so you can if in the late game you can just play it, tap it, use it right away, and then flip it and still have the vehicle to block.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it doesn't just transform tapped.
Right.
But yeah, I'm looking at this. I think you're right. In blue black, you're gonna play this. If you want to do the descended thing, it's gonna do it really well. But I'm trying to look at blue red aggro, definitely not.
No.
Blue white, I don't really see it.
No, because like you said, there's not that much if any descending in white.
Yeah.
Maybe a rare or something.
I'm not that high on a card that's only good in blue black, and
Sure.
then I don't even think every blue black deck is going to be a Descend 8
Right.
deck.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. So with the narrowness in mind, what do you want to give it?
I still think it's better than a D. I'm going to give it a C minus.
Yeah, I was just gonna go like C plus in the decks that want it. Also, this is a really kind of poignant example of why you want to be crafting with your graveyard, not your things on the battlefield, because you just don't want to be stone raining yourself to do this. You really do hope to exile something from the grave. Next up, we've got an old favorite, Chart a Course. 1 and a blue for a sorcery. You draw 2 cards, and you discard a card unless you attack this turn.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of great one drops in this set, so it won't be that hard to have this be 1 and a blue, draw 2 cards.
Yeah.
But as great, I still think I like my iceberg like better than
Really?
this.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, where do I land on that? I don't know. I think just the straight draw 2, not having to like being able to draw a cheap spell, not having to draw a 6/6 that you have to craft later. I think I like this card better. But like drawing 2 for 2 mana is just so good. And obviously your card does that too, I know.
Always do
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
though.
True, but I think it's going to do it more often than not, no? You don't think so?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Again, I'm looking at playing blue as more of a control color,
Sure,
so
sure,
that
sure.
might be part of why I'm a bit lower on this.
Yeah. I was going to give this a B minus. I just think it's a really strong card. I don't know if you want to come
I
a little
think
bit lower.
yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah.
I'll drink a B minus.
Also, the cheeky, discard for descend. Anyways, Eaten by Piranhas is up next. 1 and a blue for a aura, flash, enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a black skeleton creature with base power and toughness. 1/1.
This is pretty similar to just like destroy an attacking or blocking creature,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
there's some upside, but some downside there compared to what that would be. So fine, but not great, and like better in a control deck type of thing.
Yeah, worth noting that Explorer does put +1/+1 counters on things, so that
Mm-hmm.
will not make turn into an actual 1/1. You'll still get, you'll get a 1/1 with a counter on it, so just be careful when you're casting it. But this is one of the better versions of this bad effect that we've seen. Kind of just want to give it a C.
Yeah. I'll give it a C. Sure, C sounds fair.
When this gets destroyed, how do you get uneaten by the piranhas? I don't know how that works, but that seems to be the flavor there.
Hey, there's lots of necromancy type stuff
Sure.
in Magic. You
True,
can't,
true.
yeah.
What's up next?
Next is Hermitic Nautilus. 1 and a blue for a 1/4 artifact creature. It has vigilance, and you can pay 1 and a blue to give it +3/-3 until end of turn.
Yeah, kind of sneaky in that your opponent is not going to want to block this in certain board states. Like, you get to peck in for free for 1, and then it's like, all right, I don't block. I don't want to trade my creature, like my 4-drop, because this can trade with 4-drops. It threatens to. And they're like, all right, sure, I'll pump it, push some damage. Or you just get in and then you say, okay, leave back my mana, block your 4/3 on blocks or whatever. Good with Explorer, too. If you get a counter on this thing, comes a 2/5 being able to do that. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, just be careful you don't accidentally activate it twice on Arena.
Oh, I'm sure I'll do that at one point. Yeah, interesting card. It's not like speaking to any of the set's themes in particular. I'm sure it's an artifact creature, but like other than that, it's not doing too much. Like a C?
I was gonna give it a C plus.
Right,
Again,
yeah.
like the controlling decks, like the butt's
Annoying.
huge.
Yeah.
Vigilance is good. It's an artifact creature.
Yeah, they're really. Of course, we're seeing some of the more controlling colors, but it really does seem like lack of a good aggressive creatures and big butts for cheap. Lodestone Needle is up next. This is 1 and a blue for an artifact. It's got flash. Enters the battlefield. Tap up to 1 target creature or artifact. Put 2 stun counters on it. And it's got craft with an artifact for 2 and a blue. Backside is Guidestone Compass. It's an artifact that you can pay 1 to tap. Target creature you control explores. Activate only as a sorcery.
Yeah, this I love this card.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
It gets you your tempo on the front side, and then the back side gives you like a late game way to pretty much win the game. Like that's if you're activating that every turn, you're gonna win the game.
Yeah, you're just like you're digging through, not getting flooded, making your creatures bigger. Yeah, one of the problems with these kind of tap down a thing and put some stun counters on it is we haven't really seen too many versions of what's the next step, right? They've kind of been purely tempo cards as like, okay, tap it down and whatever you untap in 3 turns. But this actually does give you a place to like the tempo advantage you're gaining, like you mentioned. You actually get to realize that in some way because this gives you a payoff. Grade for this one? I'll give you my grade because I've been asking you. I would give this a C plus.
Okay, I am giving this a B.
Oh, like it. Yeah, I figured you'd be a bit higher on it than I was, but
Well, so okay, do you remember in was it Midnight Hunt or Vow? There was like the chill card that was like if you had a zombie, it cost one
yep,
less. Tap something, put a stun counter on it, draw a card.
yep, totally.
And so that was just one stun counter. This is two.
Mm-hmm.
This always costs 2 mana. And then it doesn't exactly draw you a card, but like the card it draws you that you can craft with an artifact to make something like that's a pretty with the time that you're given, this card on the backside, all it wants is for you to have time.
Yes, definitely.
So I just like it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, Chad is pointing out, and I mean, I know you know this, but it's like 6 mana before you get any value worth, but that's not necessarily true, because you value the tempo, too. So, yeah, I'm going to stick with my C+, but, yeah, once again, another one we'll see. What do we have next?
Next is Staunch Crewmate. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 human pirate. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact or pirate from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order.
So good. This card's so good. Holy. Like
this is what I want to be doing.
I think it seems to be like this is the two main things that blue is doing, like artifacts and pirates. Your deck's just going to be filled with these things. Yeah, this is fantastic.
Yeah, and this just shows I kind of talked about like what uncommon have we seen in blue that supports blue-green.
Right, yeah, it's very, very little, very few of them. Yeah, it does feel like Explorer is kind of in the set for number 1, a callback to original Ixalan, number 2, like as a bit of glue. It's not really an archetype in itself. But yeah, no, you're totally right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's not that hard to make it so that you have 12 to 15 hits for this in your deck,
right.
Like hopefully, and then at that point it's just going to be an amazing card.
Yeah. B+?
I was going to go B, because like it will miss.
It will miss. Yeah, it's going to whiff even a deck that's good for it sometimes. So I'm on board with a B. Next up, we've got Confounding Riddle. 2 and a blue for an instant. It's got 2 modes. Either look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, the rest in the graveyard, or counter target spell unless its controller pays 4.
Yeah, so kind of slightly upgraded reprint from before where it mills or it counters. Mm-hmm. And Convolute's been a playable card in a lot of sets, and this is Convolute with upside. It's good.
Yeah,
I don't think it's amazing, but it's good.
No, I agree. It definitely solves one of the big problems with counter spells, which is like, okay, they pass the turn or they craft, like you mentioned, and it's like, well, I wasted my mana. Of course, you can just go digging for something instead. Yeah, I think it's a perfectly solid counter spell. I imagine you won't be cutting this from most blue decks, so C+.
That's exactly what I wrote.
Great. What do we have next?
Next we have Merfolk Cave Diver. 2 and a blue for a 2/4. Whenever a creature you control explores, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn.
There it is. The big.
Here's our blue-green card we're waiting for.
And it's fine.
It's not even fine. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's like whatever. It's like a C-. C?
I think it's worse than that.
Really? Yeah, you'd go even lower.
Yeah.
So let's just say you have 5 ways to explore, and that might even be, depending on how things go, that might even be a bit generous. Like you trigger this once, maybe twice. Yeah, you're right. It's actually not very good. It's whatever. I'd give it a C-, but I don't think I want to dip quite into the D range.
Okay, I'm giving it a D+.
We got Zoetic Glyph up next. 2 and a blue for an aura. Enchant an artifact. The enchanted artifact is a golem creature with base power and toughness 5/4. And when this aura is put into the graveyard, when the Zoetic Glyph is put into the graveyard, you discover 3.
Wow.
Yeah, if you couldn't see, if you're not watching, Mark just shook his hands a lot. Yeah. Cool.
This is. I've talked about what I want to do. We've started with white and blue. I want to draft white blue artifact nonsense. I will be very happy first picking this card.
Yeah, it's also just like, it's really, you put it on one of your trinket little artifacts. What's your opponent going to do? Like, kill this thing? All right, cool. Like, they could pacify it, but just like we saw with Wicked Rolls, right? Where it's like, the wording of when this goes to the graveyard, when this aura goes to the graveyard. There's not that many ways to really get around that. Like, the thing's going to happen. Yeah. What's your grade for this one?
I was gonna go B plus.
Oh, whoa, that's super high. I was gonna give this a B minus, but wow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You know it's
Yeah, I
gonna.
think.
You know it's not an enter the battlefield effect, right? It's a goes to the graveyard.
Yeah, I know.
All right,
I
all right.
know.
Mark's like, I can read Alex. I know.
It's huge. It's
Yeah.
3 mana,
Yeah.
5/4, and like if even if they pacify your creature, it's not the creature going to the battlefield that triggers this. So
Right.
if you like craft away the artifact
Yeah.
later,
Great
like
point.
you'll still get the trigger.
Yeah. No. Definitely good point. Hurl into history. This is a cool one. 3 blue for an instant. And it says counter target artifact or creature spell. Discover X, where X is that spell's mana value.
So this will be a lot better day one and at lower ranks than it will be week 2 at high mythic. Because
Absolutely.
you can play around this. You could again, blue's not doing a ton at instant speed. You should be able to sniff this out pretty easily.
And kind of the on the flip side of that, when your opponent, who likely, if a good opponent will likely sniff it out, they'll likely kind of bait you into like, all right, you're gonna counter this 3-drop. You should probably just take it at that point. Like if your opponent is on 5 or 6 mana and they choose to play a 2 or a 3, they know what's up most likely. So
Yeah.
if you're ahead enough, maybe you can choose to wait a turn and be like, okay, if they don't play a 4-drop, I'm okay. But if you're behind enough that you just have to do something this turn, just counter the 2. It's annoying, but you gotta do it.
Yeah, but it also only hits artifacts and creatures.
Right, that's true. Yeah. Funny
So,
card.
if you hit even if you hit a 2-drop, it's not like I'm not saying it's a bad card. Like getting a 2-drop of your own and countering a 2-drop for 5 mana is still not horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, I it is a tough one to evaluate because I think if you're going to pre-release, like a lot of people listen to these set reviews for pre-release, jam it. It's gonna be pretty darn good. But week 2 definitely adjust from there. So I'm gonna give it a new grade. We're birthing these new grades: a pre-release B and a normal on the ladder C plus.
Well, it's also better in sealed.
Yeah, that too. Certainly, I agree with that. All right.
Yeah, you want to give it like a C plus?
Yeah, I would just give a C plus.
I'm not writing down pre-release. Like
Yeah, no. I was just joking with that. Don't worry.
Okay.
Council of Echoes is up next. 4 blue for a 4/4 flyer. Descend 4. When it enters the battlefield, if you got 4 permanents or more in the grave, you return 1 target non-land permanent other than the Echo, the Council of Echoes, to its owner's hand. So you get to bounce something.
Yeah, so you need to trigger that
Mhm.
because 4/4 flyers for 6 we've seen just don't cut the mustard anymore. But the fact that not only is there a lot of things like bouncing an opponent's thing is going to be pretty good, but there's a lot of things of yours that you'll want to reset and re-trigger. So if you are able to get that trigger, I think it's a pretty good card.
Yeah, there was a card in Amonkhet, which is a very fast format. Angler Drake, I think it was called, which is this card except no descent and you can only target creatures. And that card was really good even in a fast format. So this combo of big flyer plus bounce a thing is, I think, probably stronger than it might read if you're not used to this. And I don't know. I think this card is... I read this as a good card. And this is another one that I've definitely seen people be lower on than I might be. So I would give this a B minus. But like Mark said, you have to be sure you're descending. And Descend 4 is not that hard.
Okay, I'll give it a C plus.
Okay.
But yeah, it also kind of reminds me there was a card in AFR where blue was like really bad. It was like air or elemental Jin type of thing. There was a 2/5 that bounced something, and,
Yep.
and that was like one of blue's best commons.
Right.
So the effect is certainly there.
Yeah. Last blue uncommon, what do we have?
Last blue uncommon, is it? No, it's
Oh,
not
no,
the
sorry.
last
No,
blue
we have 2
uncommon.
more. My bad. Go ahead.
Okay. The next blue uncommon is Self-Reflection. 4 blue for a sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. Flashback for 3 and a blue. So you can cast it out of your graveyard for that cost.
This is another example of you really don't want to draw this card in the early game. You really want to be milling this. You really want to get to the graveyard somehow. Because if you can draw a free clone for your own creatures, that's good. But 6 mana clone your own thing is pretty weak.
Yes. Tough one to evaluate, I think.
Definitely. And it might be...
Because the upside is pretty high.
Right. And it might be like if you do get into a long game, like this card's going to be really good, even if you're not discarding it.
Yeah.
So tricky. Hmm.
My guess is that it's not great. Like the format has to be really slow for this to be an incredible card.
Yeah, and when you say really slow, it's like slower than we're even saying like, oh, it might be like the 2 drops don't attack that much. Like it has to be even, I think, markedly slow. Like not just like, oh, it's a little bit slower than we're used to. Um so I see this a little bit more as like a synergy card where blue black, if you are self milling, if you have a good chance of not drawing this card, then I like it. Probably I like a C plus, but otherwise I think this is close to a D.
Well, even then, like there's going to be times when you mill this and you're going to be happy to mill it, but you're going to be like, "Oh, none of my descent stuff is
Right.
turning off."
Yeah, that's kind of funny. Yeah, because I think you really do want, like you've been kind of alluding to, as many permanents as you possibly can in your descend decks. Well,
I
yeah.
have it. I wrote a C minus.
Yeah.
Like again, a best case scenario C
Yep,
minus.
that's where I am too. All right, the actual last
Okay.
uncommon in blue here. Sinuous Benthosaur. This is 5 and a blue for a 4/4. It's a dinosaur. When it ETBs, you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of caves you control plus the number of caves in your graveyard. Put 2 cards from those in your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order.
So if you ask me, like, what's the thing that decks needs to worry about the least? It's like late game value, right?
Right,
Because you
right.
like a bunch of the caves have Discover 4, and like you'll have tons of stuff to do with your mana. This like with 0 caves, it's awful. With 1 cave, it's 6 mana 4/4 draw 1, which is not good.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need 2 or more caves to make this playable, and it doesn't catch you up at all. Like I think this is just bad.
I wonder, think of this a little bit less as a cave deck payoff. Think of it a little more as like a descent payoff where you happen to pick up some lands like the Discover lands. There aren't that many caves you're just going to naturally play. But I am thinking that, we talked before, it's like, okay, on turn 3, you're not that likely to have 2 in play. But by turn 6, in a deck that's self-milling, you are likely to have milled some or have some on the battlefield. And then it's just like fine in a regular value deck, not like all in caves. I don't know. There's just a different angle to look at it from.
I'm gonna give it a D plus.
Okay, I'm gonna be a little more optimistic and give it a C plus. It's a pretty big difference there. But yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying though about the caves. Like you are not looking for giant value thing in the caves deck. That is all your payoffs do that. Yeah. All right, and that's blue. So what do we think about blue?
Blue. So I just love all the artifact stuff going on with blue. When blue is a powerful color, I tend to do better in those sets. Although a lot of that is based around doing stuff at instant speed. So one of the things that I kind of alluded to when we were talking about the multicolor cards, I do have concerns for the longevity of this set, just because there doesn't seem to be a ton of ways to interact with what your opponents are doing.
Interesting.
So there's not a lot of instance, there's not a lot of removal. There the counterplay is kind of just going to be like who's doing their thing a little bit better is kind of what
Yeah.
I get a sense of. And I do think the blue decks do a thing really, really well. And the thing they do really, really well is value artifacts.
Yep.
So both on the aggro and the control side, I'm looking forward to drafting a lot of artifact decks.